Steve Tamayo, thank you for joining us via Zoom today. We're very excited to have your show in the gallery here at Fremont Area Art Association. I also included one of Anne Steinhoff's paintings. She's not going to be in on the art chat today, but her work is here as well. So welcome. And I think my first question for you is that just recently I was reading an article, and I can't remember where it was online, but you talked about how your mom at the age of like 4 or 5 was actually moved into a boarding school, and a lot of her memories and history of her culture was somewhat lost. And so although she was able to share quite a bit with you, you kind of went down other avenues as well. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
You know, this was policies and acts carried out by the United States government to take away our identity as indigenous people. And so in the later part of 1880s, you know, this is when the boarding school system became a part of our way of life. And so, you know, not only my mother, but for many generations and many tribes all over across the United States, they took well over 100,000 of our native indigenous kids. And so most of them never made it home. And so everybody's like, well, there's boarding schools everywhere. I was like, yeah, but our boarding schools have huge cemeteries right next to them. And so, you know, the disease, the famine, I mean, it was devastating. And so it took the lives of tens of thousands of our kids. And so unfortunately, it also took away our identity. And so it was against the law to practice our rituals, our ceremonies. It was against the law to even speak our own languages. And so, you know, growing up, I've heard these stories of atrocities, you know, committed against our relatives all over the United States once again. And so this is why, you know, I kind of geared my life into trying to revitalize, trying to understand this way of life. And so my art is, it's very simple, you know, I'm a traditional artist. And so my family comes from Rosebud, South Dakota, you know. And so even in the history books, you know, that narrative explaining, you know, our identity is totally wrong. And so we never call ourselves Sioux Indians. And so in the history book, you read about the Sioux Indians, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is a name that was tagged, identifying us by the Anishinaabe, Ojibwa people, who you probably know of as the Chippewas.
Okay.
Because they don't call themselves Chippewas. It's like Navajos, they call themselves Dene. And so I never call myself a Sioux Indian. I am very specific, a Lakota. This is the dialect in which I speak. And so I come from, you know, the Lakotas, there's 7 bands. I come from one of those 7 bands known as the Burnt Thighs. And the Burnt Thighs explains an event that occurred in 1762, 63. And so during this time, this is when we got caught in a big prairie fire. And so because of that fire, that's why we're known and identified as the Burnt Thigh people, because a lot of our people suffered because of this prairie fire. And so understanding that, I am known as a Sichongu. And so Sichongu means the Burnt Thigh people. And Lakota is the dialect in which I speak. My family comes from a little community in between the Yankton Reservation and the Rosebud Reservation, pretty much smack in the middle. And so there's a place that we call Milks Camp. And so in my language, we call it Ta'asampe Oyanke. And so this is the place where Good Cane Milk was one of our leaders. And so he wanted to leave the river where there was a large encampment of Sichongus there. And so he took a bunch of families with them, and my family was one of them. And so we moved to the Milks Camp community on the Rosebud Reservation. And that's where a lot of my relatives still reside today.
Okay.
And so, you know, there's a really strong, rich history. But it's only, you know, told by our narratives, you know? And so, but that's history, you know what I mean? And
Right.
so you can go through the history book and this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, you know, and they've never actually asked us about our history, about our stories. And so, you know, once again, my art is, I'm a traditional artist. And so once again, it's very simple art. It's willow sticks, it's buffalo ribs, but I had to butcher the buffalo, you know?
Right.
I had to prepare these bones and how do you save these bones? And then you turn them into games. It's like the willows, you know, when is the right time to harvest the willow? And so I make my own hide glue. And so even though it's a willow shaft, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it takes me a long time just to make my natural hide glue on an open fire outside. It takes me like 4 days.
Oh,
And
wow.
so it's a very, you know, long process. And so, you know, when most people look at my art, they're like, that's just a stick with a piece of horn in it. But they don't understand, you know, the whole process of me butchering the buffalo, you
Right.
know, and it takes days. It takes, you know, like when I remove the head, I actually place that head on anthills because my art is it's safe, environmentally safe. There's no chemicals, you know, nothing harmful. And so the way that I clean my buffalo skulls, like the one on you know the wall at the gallery,
Uh-huh.
um, I placed it on an ant hill and I let the ants do all the work. And so it took them 9 months to clean that skull.
Wow.
And then I went in and I sanded the rest off and then I painted it, you know. And so, but for me, you know, I enjoy being outside and harvesting our natural painting to create the art that I create today. And so once again, it's very simple. It's the process that people don't really understand because we've become so disconnected to that
Well,
process.
and also not just your process um, of making the art piece, but then even after, if I understand correctly, you actually document a lot of these traditions and then teach in your classes, teach others these things.
So I am currently the cultural specialist. So I work for the Omaha Public Schools. I travel to 80 plus schools and I explain
Wow.
this way of life. And so any of the teachers, if the social studies teacher, if they want me to go in and teach about the history of the Umahas or Northern Poncas or Dakotas, you know, the Santee Sioux, or even, you know, the Winnebagos, in which they identify themselves as the whole chunk, you know. And so I'm bringing our indigenous voice to the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
So, but even our teachers who teach math, you know, because what's the circumference of a teepee? Just like the teepee in the gallery, you know, I had to figure that out mathematically and figure out how many designs am I going to put in there, just like those hills, you know. And so one thing about indigenous art is we incorporate the symbols, the designs, you know, because it's much deeper. It's I'm a storyteller through our design systems. And so the
Sure.
symbology, even the numbers, the numerology, the color concepts, it's things that I incorporate into my art, very specific to identify me as a Lakota.
Mm. Interesting. And so, how long have you been doing this? What age were you when you started?
Well, after I made my ways out of the military, about 22 years old or so. But prior to that, you know, I actually was a Boy Scout. And
Okay.
so, because I grew up in the city of Council Bluffs, Iowa, you know, and there is no natives there anymore, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And so I was living in a city with maybe 10 different natives. And so I was totally disconnected from my culture
Yeah.
because of what my mom endured in the boarding school system. Her identity was taken away from her. And so I was actually raised with my other half of the family, the Mexican side, on my father's side. And so there I have a very large, you know, connection to uh, this Mexican way of life, you know, understanding the food, the culture, the language, you know, and this is how I was raised. But then my mom would tell me stories about South Dakota and our relatives, you know, and so I was always fascinated with that. And so my only connection was actually to get into the Boy Scouts. And so after that, you know, it kind of faded away. But then I really thought about it. And after, and I moved to the Rosebud Reservation. And so that's not very common, you know, for us to partake in that way of life. But I went up there just to learn the language. And so that was my main goal, was to learn the language. And so
And
I
if I
wanted to.
remember right, I think I read somewhere that you have daughters, twins,
Yes.
and they also kind of influenced your want of learning more when they were interested in dance, I believe.
Yes. So my twin girls wanted to dance, you know, and my mom was helping me raise them. And so we got them back into that circle, into that powwow circle. And so I started buying things because I didn't know how to make anything. I was a single dad. And so I didn't know how to make, you know, this regalia. And so I was kind of relying on my mother, and she's like, well, I don't know, you know. So I started trying to seek out the elders in this community in the Council Bluffs, Omaha area. And so that's kind of how this started. And then it kind of just snowballed. And I started, you know, finding as many grandmas and grandpas out there who understood this way of life and explained, you know, why. And so that was my main focus, is I really wanted to understand what is the true meaning and purpose and function of our art form. Right. And then when you look at our dresses, you know, where did these dresses originate from, you know? And so then I started researching the different types of dance and song, you know? And so once again, I grew up with the Umahas, you know, and this is how you pronounce that tribe, with a U, not an O. So I live in the city of Omaha, but the Umaha is the people. And so today they reside in Macy, Nebraska, which is probably about 20, 30 miles south of Sioux City.
Okay. Well, then also these rawhide containers, I know there's 7 different shapes, basically. But these also are many times called parfleche.
Yes.
Which is not necessarily accurate. Is that right?
Correct. You know, that's the French people, when they were on the East Coast, they seen this hard skin. And so that's what it is. It's rawhide. It's hard skin. And so what they seen a long time ago was actually a shield. And so par and flesh is actually to ward off arrows. Okay. And so anything that's made out of hard skin that is deflecting the arrows, you know, they just identified it as par flesh. But for us, you know, that's a very specific bag that belongs to our women. And so that's a tool bag.
This would have held tools then.
Right. And so the women, you know, back in the day before we had metal, you know, we used a lot of the obsidian as our knives, you know, because it's so sharp. And so you just flake pieces off, you know. And so that's what we used to cut and scrape and everything with. And so, you know, it became a very useful tool. And just like bones, you know, bones, they became awls. And awl is to puncture into the hide to make the holes. And so I still extract the muscle fiber, the tendons. And so that today is what we identify as sinew. It's muscle fiber. And so if you get muscle fiber, you can shred it. And that was our thread a long time ago. And so we would just soak it in water. Some of the grandmas would actually put it in their mouth because of the acids, the enzymes in our saliva. It helps break it down. It makes it more pliable. And then they would sew with it. And so very strong, you know, you can't break sinew. And so that's what we sewed our teepees, our moccasins. And so, you know, these old practices, this is what I've been documenting. And so that rawhide container with all the other containers in there, I'm making a rawhide container educational trunk for Omaha Public Schools.
And even the colors and the shapes have meaning. This isn't you just kind of decorating it pretty. This actually has the green and yellow and red have meanings, and I know the triangle kind of references a teepee.
Correct. So if you look at the design inside the center, inside, we call that the central motif. It's the design right in the middle, right? And so that's actually a spider web. You see that
Okay.
now? And so this tells the stories of creation for Lakotas, because all tribes, we all have tricksters within our own stories or creation stories. And so, but it transforms, you know? And so for the Lakota, the spider is our trickster. If you head down south, the coyote might be, or the rabbit, or the fox, or there's different types of bird like the raven for the Northwest Coast people. And so in all of our stories, we have a trickster. And
Okay.
so when I talk to our kids today, I often talk about, you know, the trickster still exists. It's in Facebook. And so it's utilizing that social media, you know, and you have to be careful on what you really believe what's on Facebook or not. Is this the truth or not? You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And so the trickster is around each and every one of us. And so the trickster also, you know, it thrives on misery. And so it's a way for us to teach our kids to be aware of what exists outside, you know, also within, because the trickster can be within ourselves. And so, you know, when I tell these stories to my little kids, you know, they're like, there's no spider in me, you know? And I'm like, okay. I was like, who likes to hide behind doors and scare people when they come into the room? And they're like, they all raise their hand. I was like, that's the trickster.
Oh, funny. So
And
true.
so, yeah. And so, you know, I can relate all these stories to each and every one of us, you know? And so for this design specific, it is a woman's tool bag, but it's the creation story of the spider web in the middle, because for us as Lakotas, the spider made his way into a place that we call Wind Cave in the Black Hills. And so that's where our creation story takes place. And so the spider tricked us into coming out of the Black Hills. And so once we came out as a nation, then he closed up that hole and we were never able to go back into the underworld.
Wow.
And so if you read about all of our indigenous people, we all have creation stories from underneath in the underworld. And so it's a really cool way to explain our stories to our little ones, you know?
Yes, yeah.
And so the first person to come out is who we identify as Tokahe. That was the first two-legged, we call ourselves. And so he was the first one out. And so they, you know, the spider, you know, kind of was in cahoots with all of the relatives that lived outside. And so they fed him, they clothed him. He went back into the cave. He told everybody, let's go outside. You know, you're not going to believe this and how beautiful it is. And so once they came out, the spider closed the hole and we were stuck on the surface. And that's when the harsh winter hit us.
Okay.
And so we had to make an agreement with the buffalo. And so for us as Lakotas, we call ourselves the Buffalo Nation people. And so we have made this like compact, you know, agreement with our four-legged relative, the buffalo. And so if you look at the buffalo's population way back in the day, they were in the millions, just like our indigenous relatives. By the 1900s, they almost disappeared.
Right.
And so they created Yellowstone, you know, and that was the first national park. And they took a large herd, Teddy Roosevelt took a large herd of buffaloes to reside on that park. And that's how the pureblood buffalo was able to survive. Because today there's only about 6,000 true blood buffaloes. Today we hear about the bison, right? The American bison. The American bison has the DNA blood of not only the buffalo, but the cattle. And so if you look at our buffaloes today, you know, our bisons, they're about 400 or 500 pounds lighter, and their horns are starting to straighten instead of curve like yesteryears.
Interesting. Do they have any idea why that would be?
Because the DNA, the cattle blood.
Oh, okay, so that's part
They're
of the
just
cattle.
smaller than our regular buffalo. Yeah.
Sure.
And so the old buffaloes were, you know, 2,000, 2,500 pounds. Today they're about, you know, 1,700 up to 2,200 pounds.
Okay. Well, and also, buffalo hide used to be used to make the pistolas. Am I saying that correctly? Or
Tipe,
teepees?
tipestola.
But not
So,
anymore. Now it's more canvas. Is that
right. You know, because I just tanned a buffalo in my backyard last week. And so,
I think
um,
you're the only person I know that could say that.
probably, yeah. And so, you know, I tanned that hide and it took me a week to break it and to smoke it, you know. And so, what I'm doing on my frame is I'm opening up those collagen fibers. And
Mm-hmm.
so then I get, once again, you know, I don't use any chemicals harmful to the earth or to the water. And so we call it brain tanning because I actually use the brains and the fat and the water. And that's all I
Okay.
use to tan this hide.
Wow.
So I'm stretching that hide to the max. I got it on a big square frame. I'm using 300 to 400 feet of rope every 4 to 5 inches, and I'm stretching those collagen fibers to the max because I'm doing this to the skin, right? I'm
Yeah.
pulling it. And then I apply my brain solution onto that hide. And then once I break it, I have like these huge paddles, like axe handles. And then I can hear it. It's like pop, pop, pop. And I'm stretching that hide
Wow.
to the max. And it
Uh-huh.
becomes really loose on my frame. And then I take it off of my frame. I kind of sew it up, kind of like a burrito. And then underneath, I leave that open. And then I smoke that hide because that when I smoke that hide, the collagen fibers become more compact. They close and they encase that brain solution inside of it.
Okay.
And so, but it also waterproofs the hide. And so a long time ago, you know, our deep estelas, our teepees, you know, we would always have fire in there, you know, because that was the only light that we had.
Yes.
That also kept us warm, you know. So it was our light, it was our warmth, but it was also a way to cook, you know. And so when you have that fire inside of our lodges, all that smoke and all the soot making its way up, it's doing the same thing I just explained to you. It's closing those collagen
Oh,
fibers up
sure.
on the top. And so when the winter time comes, we cut off the top of our teepees, and that's what we make our boots and our pants and everything. We start getting ready for the winter time
Wow.
because all of the fibers are closed. It's compacted and it's waterproof. And so, you know, my
Amazing.
art form, you know, is extremely more functional than utilized for more than adornment, you know.
Yeah.
And so
Wow.
that bag, you know, back to our creation story of the spider web inside. If you look at that spider web once again and how the roads branch out in the four directions, the red roads, right? Because that's a concept that we believe in, which is sobriety and well-briety, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so not only trying to live this sober life, but, you know, try to maintain a healthy mental lifestyle. And so as we travel in the four directions, those are hills that it leads into. And so we travel in the four directions, and that's what that means. And so if you look inside the hills, you'll see our teepees. And so there's more teepestelas. And so on
There's
the bottom, point to the bottom one. If you point to that bottom teepee, and so when our teepees, they look like this. They're triangular in shape, right?
right.
But then the poles extend up. And so if you look at the other teepee on the top part of that, that's the poles that extend upward, and it creates what we call an hourglass.
Okay.
And so everything I do, once again, is, you know, I teach the symbology, but also the numerology, because for us, we believe in this, you know, conceptual number of 4. And so, but that takes place because of the 4 seasons, you know, and the 4
Yes.
winds and the 4 cardinal directions. And so we associate this specific number with a way of life that exists outside, just like our plants. You know, there's 4 parts to a plant. And
Mm-hmm.
so once we look at that, we look at the roots, we look at the stems, you know, and the branches, and then what's blooming on it. And so there's all these different ways to teach our kids in very specific numbers. And so once you look at this, you know, I had to figure this out mathematically as well.
Mm-hmm.
How does this fit in there? And so I teach fractions. And so, but even putting it together, you know, what is the length of one of my laces? And then
Right.
how many laces am I going to make, you know? And so I have to figure this all out, you know? And so this is how I teach math. The science is the process of creating my hide glue or harvesting my own natural paint pigments, my vegetable dyes, and even the tanning process. That's all science-based. And so, you know, once again, once you look at it, it's just a bag, but to me, it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's the whole process of teaching. It's the whole process of being Lakota and incorporating our cultural ancestral voices and teachings into making that container.
Yes. Very neat. And so this is a tool bag. So they're always shaped like this. Are they always that size as well?
That can vary, you know, depending on the tools. But if you notice, you know, with all of my containers, I make them in pairs.
Mm-hmm.
That's because life is created in pairs. And so, you know, this is just more teachings that we pass on to our relatives, you know,
Okay.
of a way of being. And so even that dream catcher next to you, you know, and so understanding that and how that came to be, you know, I work a lot with our kids in the Omaha area. And so that table there has a lot of the items that our kids, our students, you know, my students make. Go back into our youth program just to keep our program alive.
Well, and this one was made, are these from kids from Omaha then? Or are they from South Dakota?
I didn't hear that.
Oh, so the youth group that created this dream catcher?
Yes.
Where are they from?
They're from the Omaha area.
Okay.
So, but not only Omaha, we have kids, you know, we're on a training right now. And so we have some of our relatives up in Macy, some in Winnebago, you know, and so, but because we're going virtual with everything, you know, picking up kids and a different audience. And so it's a learning process still for us, you know, just like everybody else. And so we're trying to learn how to teach remotely, you know, virtually. Mm-hmm. And so for the last couple, you know, months, all I've been doing is making educational tutorial videos of harvesting plants, of setting up a teepee, of building a sweat lodge, you know. And so trying to incorporate this way of life and for the continuation of this way of life, you know, I'm documenting as much as possible. And so even when we, you know, go and harvest plants, you know, because some people just look at plants as plants, you know, but because of the pandemic, look how many gardens have popped up, you know, all over the nation. And so for us, you know, I focus on, of course, the edibles. What can we plant to eat, right? And what is that process, you know, and when do you harvest? And so this is all about new learning process, right? And so you want to, you know, plant the edibles or go seek and forage, you know, the edibles that exist outside. But I also, I seek the different kinds of what we call cheaka. Cheaka is tea. And so you can go to stores all over the place, all over Omaha, all over the country, because the different teas help with the different ailments that exist. Mm-hmm. And so we've always known this. We've just passed this on, you know, orally, because we never had a written language, you know. We had to communicate and tell our stories, you know, to pass on these messages, you know, to the next generation so that they know where and when to harvest. And so I harvest the edibles, the drinkables, and then I harvest the medicinal. And when is it the most powerful? And are you going to utilize the roots or the plants? And think about, you know, our grandparents, and not just my grandparents, but everybody's grandparents and great grandparents. Before doctors, before Western medicine, you know, was a big part of our way of life. Look at all the home remedies, you know. And so once I bring this discussion up, everybody's like, oh yeah, you know, my grandpa or my grandma used to use this for this and that. And so that creates this dialogue, you know.
Yeah, and I think that people are returning to that in large numbers now. Like you said, you see all of those teas in the store.
Yep.
Now, I would say 20, 30 years ago, they, you know, maybe they were there, but they were just in maybe specialty stores. But now you're seeing them at every chain grocery store and everywhere.
Yeah. You know, for the longest time, all we ever had was Lipton, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But now look at the teas, you know, and look at all the cures, you know. This
Mm-hmm.
is for this ailment and stuff like this. So I was just like, this is a really cool time, you know, because it's opening people's eyes. And so that's what I really like about this time period, you know.
Yeah. It
And
is.
so the last plant that we harvest, because we do everything in fours once again, you know. So it's the edibles, the drinkables, the medicinal, and the spiritual. And so when I pray, you know, as a Lakota, I burn sage. And so we harvest sage from the Black Hills. And
Okay.
so we never uproot our plants. We cut at the stem at ground surface. And so, you know, for our relatives up in the Great Lakes area, they harvest a lot of sweetgrass.
Mm-hmm.
And so sweetgrass, you know, has this very sweet aroma, you know, but then we use it in prayer. And then our relatives to the east, and when I say east, I'm talking about the Carolinas, because of the tobacco, the natural tobacco that exists. And so no additives, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
so today, you know, look at all the additives, the poisons that are incorporated into our tobacco, because we've utilized tobacco for a long, long time, you know. And
Right.
so I use some of that tobacco, but I also harvest what they call dogwood, which is different types of like different barks, you know.
Okay.
And so I use that for my different tobaccos, you know. And then to the south, you know, a lot of our relatives harvest and utilize flat cedar. And so these are the four plants that we use in prayer. And so these are spiritual plants, and we
Now, when
create
you're
little
using it
bags.
in prayer, is this ingested or something they're burning or?
So, you know, the commonality here is even on Sundays when you go to like a church, any church, there's something burning in that church. And it might be as simple as a candle, you know, and it
Mm-hmm.
might be some kind of incense, you know,
Yeah.
that they're burning. And we have this belief, we've always had this belief. And so when that smoke goes up, it's taking our thoughts and our prayers up to the Creator. And so we didn't know about Jesus. We didn't know about, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Catholicism, you know, that was totally new to us. And so we've always prayed, you know. And so for us, but even then, you know, in our language, the old ways that we acknowledge the Creator is takush kashka. But that kind of disappeared. And then it became wakan tonka. And then it became tunkashila. And now it's ate. And so we're utilizing these four words. And so takush kashka was the Creator who made movement. Wakan tonka. And wakan, to us, anything that is wakan, we can't really explain it. It's so powerful. And so it can either give life or take life. That's how
Okay.
powerful wakan is. Tonka is something that is huge. And so in the movies, you hear about us explaining, you know, the buffalo. And so when I acknowledge the buffalo in my language, it's ta. We just say ta. Ta is a buffalo, but it's big, it's huge, it's
Mm-hmm.
2,000 pounds. That's why it's tatanka in the movies. So if
Okay.
you ever do watch like Dance with Wolves, you'll hear tatanka, right?
Yeah.
Ta is the buffalo, tonka, it's huge, it's massive. And so we're
Okay.
explaining the size of that buffalo. And
And
so this is how important our language is. And so I explain all kinds of stories, you know, but I explain it in the Lakota language as well as in English. And so even, you know, what exists outside, you know, and even in my art, um, I've been on this, it's called a GONA training. It's a gathering of Native Americans. And so it's been a 3-day workshop that I've been working with the kids. And I introduced, you know, the first day, this project to tell stories, but not write it down. And I told them they can't write this story down. They had to memorize it. And so I talk about how Devil's Tower came to be. And so we know of Devil's Tower, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, in my art form, I'm telling this story, but we're utilizing shadow puppets. And so I have these 7 little girls who are running through the woods, you know, and then here comes this Mato Tonka, this big bear, you know, who's trying to chase them and trying to get to them. And so they kept running and running, and they knew that they couldn't outrun that bear. And so all of a sudden they just stopped. They held hands. They started praying. And so underneath their feet, the Creator took care of them, and the ground started shaking and the earth moved upward. And this is how Devil's Tower came to be. And so they stayed on top of that mountain, and the bear clawed at it. And if you look at Devil's Tower today, you can see the claw marks into the rock formation, right? And so those little girls kept going up. And so for us, little girls are Wichichala, Wichakbeo Shakumi. These are the 7 little girls who turned into the stars. And today we acknowledge this constellation as Pleiades, or as the Big Dipper today. Because we have our little ones, just like every culture, every society, asking, Taku, 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 why, right? We have all of our little kids always asking us why about everything, you know? And so we have stories that coincide about that land formation, about the 7 little girls who turned into the stars, and how that Big Dipper is a part of our way of life, because we're timekeepers, indigenous people, because we had to be in order to harvest the plants that we needed. And so we look at the stars all the time, just like many societies all over the world, from, you know, from now to, you know, since the beginning. And so the Big Dipper rotates. I don't know if you're aware of that. And so seasonally it rotates. In the springtime, it's actually upside down. And that explains the spring rain and how it comes to us. Because the Big Dipper is emptying all that rain at Magaju, you know, from the Makpia and from the clouds. Here comes the rain, you know.
Yeah.
But we have stories that coincide with everything that exists, because once again, the little ones are always asking why. And so through our symbology, our numerology, our color concepts, that's why it's green, you know, because it explains the earth that we acknowledge as Grandmother Earth, you know. And we've all heard of Mother Earth, right? We just say Uchimaka. This is Grandmother Earth. And so we've always identified this place as that. We've always understood the displacement of the land masses, the Pangean theory. We have creation stories a long time ago that explains that, before that even became a part of the science world.
Oh, interesting.
And so we've been telling this story. We say, it's a hard K. We say, hihanike. This means way before, you know, time began. This is how long ago it was. And we explain how the earth shook and separated. And so, you know, these are really old stories, but I'm an orator, you know. I tell these stories to my little ones, and I use the symbols, you know, from the pre-K all the way up into high school. And so, you know, I'm very happy and lucky that I get to be able to teach as an adjunct instructor at Metropolitan Community College.
Yes.
As well as UNO. And so I teach Native American art, a studio class on this way of life.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so you don't have to be Native.
Tell people a little bit about the Bluebird Cultural Initiative, your nonprofit.
So Bluebird Cultural Initiative, Bluebird is actually my grandfather's name. That's why I chose to acknowledge my ancestors, my relatives, my grandfather, and understand, you know, how important it is to never let go, to never forget, you know, where you come from. And so Zingtala Toashte was his name. And so Good Bluebird, it was actually his name. And so that was just his name, just like Steve Tamayo, right?
Yeah.
So Bluebird Cultural Initiative was created by my wife and I, Susan, probably about 3.5, 4 years ago, because we wanted to incorporate revitalizing this way of life and creating these educational methods of teaching the next generation of how important it is for self-identity. And so that's what the Bluebird Cultural Initiative is it's revitalizing the past, to bring into the present and to teach the future of many generations.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
And how widespread, how far have you traveled with that nonprofit to spread the word?
Coast to coast.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah. And so we were the first Native American dance troupe from the Plains to ever perform at Disneyland. And so with our youth group, the ones that are making these dream catchers and earrings, they're part of our youth group that we travel with. And so most of them are dancers and singers.
That's fantastic.
And so we performed at Disneyland. We've been all over Chicago, St. Louis. We performed at the National Museum of American Indian in Washington, D.C. And so, yeah, we've been on the road. We've traveled to, the Southwest to have this cross-cultural exchange, not only with the Mission Indians in California, but down in the Southwest region with the Taos Pueblo. And so having this interaction of the similarities of indigenous relatives coming together as one, of solidarity is one of our main missions and goals.
Mm-hmm.
But, understanding the importance of our language, me as a, understanding the importance of our Lakota language, just like, the 600 plus languages that exist, and never letting go of who we are.
Yes. Yeah.
It's something that, I incorporate daily. And so I'm in my art studio creating something to help, the next generation.
That's great. Well, and also I wanted to bring up the what is now considered a dance stick. I've got it right here. I'll see if I could get kind of a whole shot of it. And you and Susan had sent me some information when we were hanging the show. And one thing that struck me about this was how it was like a battle stick, because at the time, just being struck was considered kind of such an embarrassment that was just as good as death. Because tell us a little bit about that.
And so, we hear about powwows today, and so, it's a gathering of many different nations today. And as we compete, we compete today, we're still warring against tribes from all over the country, but today we're doing so in song and dance. And so, even there's a lot of relatives in the Plains area, we travel all over the country to compete in different powwows in different regions. And so when I explain the regions, we live in the Plains. And so this is some of my teachings, but up in the Northeast coast is where, like the Iroquois Confederacy is. But if you head down south, this is where the Seminoles, the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaws live, You head up to the Great Lakes area, and this is the woodland region where the Anishinaabe, Ojibwa, Chippewa people, the Senecas. And then, of course, Lakotas, Omahas, Ponkas, we all live in the plains. And so you head up into, the Northwest where, our Tlinkits, our Haidas, our Kawakawak people live. And then down into California where you have almost 200 tribes. Wow. And so today, even the Southwest where our Pueblos, the 19 different Pueblos like Jemez and Isleta, that's where they all reside. But also the largest tribe, in the country is today, once again, known as the Navajo, but they identify themselves as Diné. And so that's how I acknowledge our relatives to the Southwest. And so the item that you're holding, is a true, real eagle talon at the end. And so for us, I had to fill out this application and submit it to the United States government. They sent me the whole entire carcass of an eagle. But once again, because they're protected under federal law, you know, we have to wait for something to happen to this relative. And so throughout this discussion, I've been acknowledging, you know, all of these four-legged and winged relatives here as relatives, because in every single one of our languages, the word animal doesn't exist. That's a hierarchy that was brought here by European thought. And utilizing that language isn't something we incorporate into our teachings. And so collectively, everything that exists, we're all at the same level. And so in my language, we call that wa maka shkashka. And these are the beings that roam the earth. That includes the winged, like in your hand, the four-legged right behind you, the water relatives, and the two-legged. And so that's how important that is. And then we acknowledge the underworld relatives, like the spiders, you know, and the snakes, because they have roles in our way of life and our teachings. And so once again, you're correct. That is what we call acoustic. And so for a way for us to show how brave we actually were back in the day, we would ride into an enemy's camp and just touch them with a stick. It was just a simple straight stick, counting coup. And so we had to have a witness of us riding into an enemy's camp just to count coup and touch them. And so this is how we obtained our feathers in yesteryear.
Interesting.
And so if you look at our relatives, like our bonnets, you know, every single one of those feathers were earned for a specific act.
And that was, as opposed to outright killing someone, they would use the stick.
Right. Because we knew the hardship
so
valuable.
Yes.
We knew the hardships that family would face if we took their life, you know, and they never did anything really to us, except, you know, for us, we had natural boundaries, which were tree lines and mountain ranges and rivers, you know, those were our natural boundaries. And so within those natural boundaries, we protected the firewood, the wild game, you know, and look at the foraging of the plants that we needed to survive. That's what we were protecting, you know? And so if you invaded our territory, you're trying to take away our firewood. And think about how important firewood was back in the day.
Sure.
Once again, all of our relatives, because of the warmth, you know, because of cooking. That's how important this was, even light, you know? And so once again, you know, that stick made as a coup stick to count. Today it's a dance stick that we're incorporating, because today we're reenacting a lot of our songs in our languages. You know, we call them oloa. Oloa is the song. Oka are the singers, and they're hitting that big drum that we call a chanchega. And so that drum is very special to us, because to us, we acknowledge that as the heartbeat of the people.
Okay.
And it's one of the oldest instruments in the world, you know? Every society utilizes a drum somehow, some way. And so often most of us think of that beat as our heartbeat. It's a continuation of life. And so when they outlawed this practice, you know, by policies and acts carried out by the United States government, we had to go into hiding. We had to hide in the canyons. We had to practice our language in the dark, in the canyons, to keep it alive. And so there's a reason why a lot of people, a lot of tribes have lost their languages, because of restrictions placed upon us.
Sure.
And so, you know, once they placed us on reservations, to us, that's actually like we identified that reservation as a POW camp. We had to get a pass until 1930s to leave our lands, our reservations.
Wow.
And so this is what people don't understand, you know. And if we left without that pass, we were considered hostile, in which they could hunt us down. And so
that's even as late as in the 30s?
Yeah, 1930s. You know, we couldn't even pray. We couldn't conduct our ceremonies until 1978.
Wow.
They finally passed the Native American Religious Freedom Act. So, you know, these are things that I'm trying to bring into the classroom, not only for our students, you know, our Native students, but for all of our students. And not only our students, but also our teachers. Because if I can teach one teacher, you know, look how many generations I can change.
That's
and
fantastic.
So if they're willing to have that open mind, you know, and carry these teachings within their own heart, You know, we can touch and we can make a difference.
Yeah. And so in 1978, prayer and some of the traditional ceremonies was kind of allowed. So how long did indigenous people go without, you know, and probably losing those things during that period? So how many years would have that been?
So in the later part, 1880s, they outlawed our way of life.
Okay.
So almost 100 years. It was 98
Wow.
years. Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
so understanding that, you know, that's why I'm really happy that, you know, you asked me to come over and showcase my art, because we are still here. And so we're still utilizing our voice, our songs, our prayers, our ceremonies, you know. And I'm also with the Nebraska Arts Council. And so if anybody, any schools out there, you know, in Nebraska specifically, you know, you can contact the Nebraska Arts Council and go through that process, because there is specific grants available to a lot of our rural communities, you know. And so just keep that in mind. But
Yeah, that's great
I love to
information for
travel.
teachers.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So also we're running out of time, but I did want you to kind of touch base on this object up here. Tell us what it's made of and what it's for.
So right up above the deer hooves, those are the bones. We call them knuckles. And so, you know, all of the games that exist, usually played in the United States or all over the world, you know, they have origins of indigenous peoples. And so when I say that, you know, I'm not only identifying, you know, Native American people, I'm talking about indigenous people all over the world, you know, because games are a pastime. It's a favorite pastime, you know. And so everybody plays games, every culture and every society, you know, but it's a way to gather as a family, you know, to communicate, to have fun and share something, you know, that we call medicine, and that's just laughter, you know, because you need that in your life. And so that's you know, a game very similar to that is the pin and cup game.
Okay.
And so you hold that metal rod, you know, back in the day, it was just a willow stick tied to that buckskin lace, and you try to throw those bones up and you catch them onto that stick. And so those are worth more points than if you just catch the beads holding onto that copper rod. And so, you know, I used to teach at a university called Sinteglashka University on the Rosebud Reservation in Rosebud, South Dakota. And so one of my classes I created for that university was traditional games. And so it took me years to do the research and figure out these old games.
I can imagine.
I had to interview grandmas and grandpas. I had to go, luckily, we made our ways to the Smithsonian and found their games. And here, like a couple years after I completed my syllabus for this class, the Smithsonian called me because there's an exhibit of games that they wanted to portray and you know, in their museum. And so they called me up, and so I flew to DC and spent quite a few months there researching and helping them. And so I have my own games exhibit, you know, from most of the games that was actually in their collection, because they didn't understand. Just like that game, if you picked it up, you're like, what is this? You know?
Yes.
And so there's very few people of us left that understand these games. And in the back room, you know, those are game pieces. And so there's stories, different stories that coincide with those games. And so hopefully when this opens up, you know, I can make my way to Fremont and show you these games and how we play them.
Yes, we'll do that sometime. I think we're hoping to maybe have you back next July, and by then we'll be through this whole.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Serious.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for your time today. I know we were planning on a Facebook Live, and somehow Facebook isn't really connecting properly, but I'm going to put this video on Facebook, and I'll let you know if any comments or questions come in for you. But thank you for your time, and take care, and we hope to see you soon, Steve.
Awesome. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it.
Yes. Take care.
Take care once again.
Bye-bye.